I enjoyed the peace and solitude of my night shifts. The morgue was my sanctuary, a place where the dead lay in silence far removed from the chaos of the living world. For those of you who have never been inside a morgue or don't know what a morgue is the temperature-controlled containers, or as we call them, cold storage rooms, where bodies are stored. They are essentially refrigerated drawers that are large enough to hold an adult. I arrived at the morgue about 8 that Wednesday night for the start of my shift. It was so quiet that all I could hear were my own footsteps echoing through the halls. I unlocked my office, put down my bag, and headed straight for the kitchen, the smell of brewing coffee already lifting my spirits. With a steaming cup in hand, I made my way back to my tiny office inside the morgue. I settled into my chair and opened a book while sipping my coffee and continued reading. I always find that time goes much faster when I read. Everything was so quiet except for the occasional hum of machinery. There wasn't really much to do. It's not like a hospital where you have to check up on your patients every few hours. No, these dudes are well behaved. They are quiet and never ring the bell for a nurse to turn them. Sorry, just some inside humor. It was about 11:30 that night when I heard footsteps. They were soft at first, barely noticeable, but then they grew louder. I saw the flicker of a flashlight in the cold storage room and immediately thought it was a colleague, so I got up and walked over, but it was empty. "That's strange," I muttered. My breath misted in the air. Not thinking much of it since it's a morgue and temperatures are low in there, I turned and went back to my office. I've never really encountered any strange noises before, so I just shrugged it off and went back to reading. At 2 in the morning, I heard more footsteps in the cold storage and a loud bang. My heart was beating so fast. I tiptoed to the room, slowly opened the door, and peeked inside. All I saw was a flashlight shining on one of the containers, and the container door was wide open. A body still covered with an evidence sheet had been pulled out of the container. I tiptoed to the slab and checked the toe tag. Thomas Blake, it read. Both my hands shot to my mouth as I tried to muffle a scream that crept up my throat. Thomas was the diener. The diener is a morgue attendant who is responsible for moving and cleaning the body, and in some cases assisting in the autopsy. He worked in the morgue for the past 43 years and had recently died of a heart attack. I pushed the slab back into the drawer and closed the door. I looked around the room. Everything was in place and it was so ghostly quiet. I have to admit, my nerves were on edge, and as I walked to the kitchen to pour myself a strong cup of coffee, I kept looking over my shoulders. Never in all my years working at the morgue have I experienced any form of footsteps, noises, or anything that would suggest there is something else except a human present. I walked back to my office, picked up my book, and started reading again. I couldn't focus, so I put the book down, got up, and started walking down the passage. I felt a swoosh of wind in my face, and then something touched my arm. I turned around, but there was nothing there. "Hello," I whispered softly in case the ghost heard me. No response. My heart was racing and I was breathing heavily. I walked back to my office, picked up my book, and continued reading. A loud scream came from the passage area. It was a high-pitched shrill. It was so unexpected that I flung my book in the air and nearly toppled my chair. Pushing my chair back, I raced down the passage. There in front of me, a ghostly figure materialized. I flung my body against the wall as if wishing the spirit hadn't noticed me. It was the spirit of the deceased diener. My heart pounded in my chest. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the ghostly figure. As I turned to leave, the spirit seemed to follow me. Back in my office, I tried to focus on my book, but the words swam before my eyes. All I could think about was the diener's ghostly figure and the morgue that had become his eternal home. I couldn't shake the image of the diener's ghost from my mind. From that night onwards, I began to notice other strange occurrences. Lights flickered without reason, doors creaked open and shut, and I often felt a cold breeze pass by when there was no open window. The atmosphere grew more oppressive each night, and I could feel Thomas's presence more strongly. I opened Google and searched for Thomas Blake. I'm not sure if I should be doing this in a morgue, but I found an old photograph of him in the archives. He was standing in front of the morgue, a faint smile on his lips. Behind him in the shadows, I noticed something odd. There was another figure barely visible watching him. As I looked at the photograph, the room grew colder. Then I heard a faint whisper, a voice calling my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. By this time, my heart was racing so fast. I felt a presence behind me. I didn't dare look back. Every night, the haunting grew more intense. I heard footsteps following me, whispering voices, and I saw shadows just out of sight. One night, as I was leaving the cold storage room, the door slammed shut behind me. It was 5:30 a.m. I was alone and day shift only arrived at 6:30. I searched every inch of that door, trying to find a latch or handle or something I could pull to get me out of there. Then I felt a hand passing through my arm, and I felt a surge of cold that made me shiver uncontrollably. I screamed at the top of my lungs even though there was no one there. I turned my back to the door and slid down to the floor, curling my legs up to my chin. My arms were folded around my legs as if this will give me extra warmth. I drifted in and out of consciousness, and every time I woke up, I would scream. Finally, I heard voices. I jumped up and started banging on the door, screaming. Then I heard a click and the door swung open. This was the last time I worked in the morgue. I resigned that same day and left, never to return.